Hi, everyone. Welcome to City Square Podcast, where we talk with everyday people about faith and work. My name is Micah. My guest this episode is Marc Gajeton. He's a husband, father, and confessional Lutheran from DFW, Texas. He enjoys yard work, volunteering at his church, and correcting people's theological errors online. How you doing, Marc?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Micah. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's get people get to know you a little bit. Tell me a bit about your background, where you grew up, and how you came to be living in Texas.
Yeah, I grew up in Virginia, actually. And let's see, from Virginia, I moved to the opposite side of the country, California, where I met my then to be wife. Moved back to Virginia. And let's see, it was from there that we moved to where we currently are now, Texas. And during that time, we became Lutheran. And so here we are today, confessional Lutherans, as you said.
Nice. That's cool. So you guys met in California, and what actually drew you to Texas? Was it work? Was it church? Was it something else?
It was my wife's schooling. So what brought us back to Virginia from California was her schooling. And then she, in order to finish her schooling, she did an internship here in North Texas. And we loved it. Kind of found it to be like a blend between California and Virginia in a way. And so we stuck around. We found a great church before moving out here. That was definitely one of the things that kept us around. Good church with a good school. And so we've been here since 2014.
Awesome. So what was your church background like?
So I was raised in the church, and it was primarily my mother. So shout out to her for bringing us all to church when we were kids. She did raise us in the Baptist church. So I was born in '88, and naturally I was baptized 8 years later then, in 1996 as a Baptist. But I would actually say that during probably from middle school through college, I had fallen away from the faith. I had left the church. But towards the end of college there, that's when the Lord started drawing me back. Me and my wife both were to-be wife at that time. And so when we moved back to Virginia, I switched up my studies and finished an online program for a bachelor's of science and religion at Liberty University. And it was during my studies there that that we became Lutheran, actually. So funny enough, at a Baptist college, that's where I found I would say, the truths of Lutheranism.
I'm sure that was their intended goal, right? Okay, interesting. So this, what we're going to talk about tonight, specifically this debate you recently had with a gentleman named Will Kinney, was over, in a way, the King James Version, maybe a specific sort of subset of that topic. So Liberty probably didn't give you the King James as your preferred Bible version, right? What did you grow up reading?
I did grow up reading the King James Version, and probably what I remember most from when I was younger is sitting in the pews when I was supposed to be listening to sermons and whatnot, and just reading the book of Revelation, actually, because what kind of kid is not fascinated by dragons and beasts and cosmic warfare and all that. So
it is one of the more exciting books, I'd say.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that's what I grew up reading. And I can't really think of many other translations that I came across in my young life besides the King James.
Gotcha. I know so is the King James, is that your preferred translation, or do you have other ones you go to as well?
Yeah. So plot twist, I'm a King James onlyist. No. It is my
That's
preferred
reserved for
translation.
Baptists, I think.
It is my preferred translation for many reasons. Probably the primary one being I just find it to be beautiful, the old language to be beautiful, and then the its place in history and tradition. I'm big on tradition. But actually, uh, for the Psalter, I prefer the Book of Common Prayer Psalter for reading or chanting the Psalms. So I guess basically you could say I'm Anglican in that way.
So is that
Like my King
the
James Bible with my Book of Common Prayer Psalter.
so the Book of Common Prayer, how does that the Psalter in there, is that the Coverdale
Uh,
version?
so from what I can tell, it's large. It's not exactly the Coverdale.
Okay.
And I want to say I don't want to speak incorrectly. I don't think it's exactly the Coverdale, but it is largely it's largely the Coverdale, but
Okay.
the original
Did
whatever.
the Coverdale predate the King James, or are they
Yeah.
like contemporary versions, so to speak?
Yeah, so Coverdale, he man, I might get my history all messed up here. I don't know if the Great Bible was no, I think he had his own translation, and then he also worked on the Great Bible. And I want to say that the Book of Common Prayer Psalter is more closely resembles the Great Bible, but I could be wrong on those facts. In any case, yeah, it preceded the King James. And from what I understand, the people at that time, they had developed such an ear for Coverdale Psalter that they just they didn't want to be supplanted, and so it
Gotcha.
remained as the prayer book Psalter, and I think rightly so, because it's very beautiful.
So I should put an asterisk beside confessional Lutheran and put in closet Anglican.
Yeah, when it comes to, I guess, personal piety, you could say.
All right, nice.
In some ways, at least.
And then so that's interesting because I know the LCMS, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which we're both part of. Um, I don't know. Do they have an official translation? I know the ESV is probably the most widely used for like Pew Bibles, perhaps, and pulpit readings. But do you know if there's an official translation for the Synod?
The ESV is about basically as official as it gets. Yeah, I'm sure congregations are free to use other translations if they wanted to. But basically, all of the publications coming out of the publishing arm for the LCMS, which is Concordia Publishing House, they're all at this point pretty much the ESV.
Gotcha. I will let them know that you think they're wrong. That's cool.
No, yeah, I'm not a fan of the ESV. I'd even prefer to see something like the New King James over the ESV, but the KJV over any of them.
KJV overall. All right. So you were recently part of a debate, and what was the exact title of the debate?
Uh,
I'm a bad podcast host and didn't write it down beforehand.
Yeah, so the proposition that we settled on was, is the King James Bible the sole infallible rule and norm for theology, or source and norm, one of those words, essentially.
Okay. And it was hosted by, once again, a channel that I forgot to note, but we'll probably put a link in the description for
Yeah,
when this video
standing for
goes
truth.
live.
Yep, Standing for Truth was the name of the podcast, and the host is Donnie. I don't know his last name, but really nice guy.
Gotcha. Okay.
Really cool, seemingly up and coming channel.
So how did the debate come to be? Like, who initiated it?
So, I know Will Kinney through some infamous Facebook groups, I guess you could say, or at
To
least
be
one.
unnamed, to not
and
be named.
I saw, and I don't know how I saw it. I was just on YouTube or something. But I saw that he was going to be debating a guy named Turretin Fan, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's another name that I'm familiar
Vaguely.
with through James White, because I do follow, or I keep up with James White. Um, and so I tuned into that debate, and um, it was a good one to watch. And I wouldn't say Church and Fan lost or anything like that, but what Will Kinney does, I think, is he gets away with a lot of things, both online and in his live debates. And so I just tuned in, and I was making comments in the chat. I posed some questions to the debaters, and at one point I just made an offhand comment that I would be willing to debate Will Kinney in the chat. And Donnie apparently pays pretty close attention to the chat there, so he picked up on it. He said, "Yeah, send me an email. We'll set it up." And after the debate, I didn't think too much of it, but a little bit of time, not a whole lot of time passed, and I just decided, for whatever reason, that okay, well, let me just follow up on it and see where it goes. So I sent an email to Donnie, letting him know that I could still be interested in debating Will, if he were interested. And I let him know that I'm a Lutheran, and that I would be taking specifically Lutheran positions, if anything. And so he responded back. He said, "Yeah, Will would love to debate basically the same topic." So the title of their debate was, "Is the King James Bible inerrant or free from all error?" And that's not something that I would want to debate, because I don't think that it really gets to the heart of the issue. And so I sent an email back recommending essentially the debate proposition that we settled on. And Donnie replied back again. He said, "Oh yeah, okay, got it set up." And he set it up for, it was Thursday, August 25th, and so I had about a month of time to prepare for it. And then the rest, as they say, is history.
Interesting. So did you find did you find that Will was there to debate your premise from your perception, or was he there to kind of debate something else? That might be begging the question too much if I'm using that right, but
Yeah.
I'm not
No,
trying to set him up to fall or anything.
no, I do, and in fact, I think many people participating in the debate, and in the audience as well, uh, kind of had a different understanding of the debate proposition than I did. And so I know we'll get into some of that later, but yeah, I don't think we had similar understandings of what we were actually there debating.
Gotcha. So what was your goal then for that type of debate? Because I've, full disclosure for everyone, I grew up in a KJV only church, household, movement, and there's not a lot of wiggle room, shall we say, for some people who have very strong views about the King James. I was interested to watch it because I know you and know that the King James is your preferred translation. So, usually when you have two opposing sides, you've got, an NIV onlyer versus a KJV onlyer, and it's kind of a lose-lose no matter what side you take, because, there's not really a clear position. But knowing, or the positions, in fact, might be two opposed and neither is willing to bend because they've all already made up their mind. So someone like you who prefers a King James over basically every other translation for, your devotional life and other uses, it just seems like it would be an interesting, even almost a more friendly debate, you'd think. Um, Maybe not with Will, but on the topic in general.
Uh-huh.
You know.
Yeah, one of the things that I want, I find to be most important is theological accuracy. So while I do, um, a lot of people prefer the King James, and they say they prefer it, and I think I maybe even go a little bit beyond prefer, because I really do not enjoy reading most or any other versions, almost. And I actually think I'm probably a pretty big proponent of the King James in that way, trying to convince others that they should actually adopt it as their primary Bible. But because it's important to maintain theological accuracy, I do not end up in the what I would call extreme position of King James onlyism. And that's one of the things that I wanted to try to bring to the forefront with the debate proposition that I recommended, because when it comes down to it, I think the King James only position is really extreme. And a debate proposition like, is the King James inerrant or free from all error, doesn't really get to the real heart of the matter and expose the position of King James onlyism for how extreme it really is. So what I wanted to do was to provide more of a theological argument, and to not necessarily avoid all textual critical matters, but recognizing that those again don't allow one to really reach the heart of the matter. So I wanted to argue, to give kind of a different argument than you'll typically hear in a lot of King James debates. And so let's see, I wanted to do something obviously succinct. There are so many inconsistencies in the King James only position that there are a number of ways that I could have gone, I think. And in fact, I had like 20 to 30 questions that I could have asked, but because there's only so much time, I had to pick what I thought would be the strongest points, the ones that would really stick.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to try to provide something succinct. And I think getting off into textual critical matters as like the main thrust of the debate doesn't really allow for getting putting together like a really succinct, solid argument. Because, well, if you look at Will Kinney's website, I mean, he's got like hundreds of example passages there that he goes into great detail on, you could say. And like I said, I had a month to prepare. This guy's been doing it for decades now. There's no possible way I'd be able to look at every single one of those examples that he likes to use to try to prop up his position. And so for that reason, I wanted to take a different approach and to try to again, not totally avoid textual critical matters, but not make it the main part of my argument. And then also kind of going back to what I said about his debate with Turretin, I wanted to try to control the debate, which was definitely challenging. He's very good at kind of framing the issue in a positive light for him, or really or even reframing the issue, which I think he attempted to do throughout our debate. And so I wanted to try to control it in a way, to keep it focused on the more important matters, and not let him get away with a lot of the things he normally gets away with.
Gotcha.
And just stepping outside my comfort zone.
So you're not a professional debater?
Not by any means. And I don't even like public speaking. So the fact that it was online was definitely helpful. But even then, I don't like to just put myself out there like that. But
yeah,
so it was good it's good for me, get out of my comfort zone a little bit, do something I hadn't done before, and it was a good experience, and I really I enjoyed it.
Do you think you'll do more debates? Like, is that something you want to continue?
Um, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely still interested in doing some more debates. Um, Probably not really on the King James topic because, uh, like I said, I'm a big King James fan, so I'm not here to, beat down on anyone for for reading their King James Bibles, but um, what I and I didn't really, I wasn't looking to win the debate. What I was wanting to do was to try to add to the conversation that, in a way that um, I don't think, or at least I haven't heard from a lot of people who kind of debate this topic. So hopefully I accomplished that.
Hmm.
And maybe someone else will kind of pick up on some of the arguments that I made um, and do better with them. I don't know. We'll see. But as far as other debates, yeah, I'd be interested in other topics, and maybe I can get a few under my belt and see if I improve or do any better. And if not, then maybe I'll resign at that point. But if I can,
What what are
continue.
uh what are some of the topics you would be interested in debating?
um, Probably especially more, I guess you could say, Lutheran distinctives. Um, so like on baptism or baptismal regeneration.
So like debating with other traditions, Christians from other traditions.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, so Lutheran distinctives like that. Um, I'd also be interested to know if there is like an audience for not strictly political debates, but like, politics as informed by religion, maybe.
Hmm.
So some things like that. But I'm not too sure. So we'll see.
Gotcha.
I think Donnie at Standing for Truth said he would be interested to see me in some more debates. So we'll see.
That's cool. So give me an overview of how you think it went.
So, uh, well, if the aftermath is any indicator, it seems to me that Will uh, was kind of in panic mode there. Maybe not extreme panic mode, but uh, like immediately after the debate, there was one point that I made about you could say, King James textual variant, that, as far as I'm concerned, he didn't have a good answer for in the debate. And so he was trying to come up with one after the fact, and the one he
Oh,
came up with still wasn't very good. Uh, but um, and we exchanged some words after the debate, and he was not too happy with some of the things I said, but I'll just leave that there.
was
And
that was that public or was that like in a private chat or something?
it was on his Facebook page.
Okay.
Yeah. So he ended up deleting some of my comments and threatening to block me. But anyway, be
Locke's
that
such a you're such a sweet guy though. You've never offended anyone ever.
yeah. Well, I'll let you know, I won't come to any other conclusions based off of that. But as far as the debate itself, um, at first, actually, like immediately after the debate, I just kind of thought that I did okay. Um, but having gone back and listened to it a couple of times now, and actually I listened to it right after too. I kind of sped through it just because, well, one, I thought I was yelling the whole time, and I wanted to, make sure I wasn't hurting people's ears. So I don't think I was. But so I listened to it immediately after, and I listened to it again the other night. And after listening to it another couple of times, I actually think I deserve a little more credit than I gave myself initially, and would say that all things considered, I think I did fairly well. Um, but uh, Yeah, so fairly well. I wouldn't say that, you know, it was amazing or anything, but
Hmm.
for first debate. Um, but now, did you want an overview of like just?
Well, how did you like the format? Was there anything unique about the format or?
Yeah, the format. So this is kind of funny because I had asked via email before the debate was set up, you know, what the format was going to be, and I asked a couple of times and didn't get a response. So I didn't really find out what the format was until, you know, just before the debate started. Luckily, I had kind of prepared for, because I'd seen that format a couple of times on his channel, so I kind of
Okay.
prepared for it. But um, so the opening statement, the rebuttal that's all pretty standard. But then what we did was like a free flowing discussion, and I'll say I don't prefer that. I would prefer more of a like each person gets 10 minutes to ask questions or something like that, while the other person responds. Because in a free flowing discussion, well, that's where Will Kinney is really strong, because, you know, he's very good at completely dodging questions and just like, you know, turning
Hmm.
on a dime and trying to take it in the direction that he is more favorable to him. So it was very challenging to try to, yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know that I got a single question that I asked him answered forthrightly. Um, so although I think he did not get away with as much as he might normally get away with, though, in other debates. So yeah, that particular part of the format was very challenging, and and just the fact that I think most of the people in the audience were KJV onlyists, or a lot of people, or a lot of them were, as far as I could tell from going back and reading the comments.
Hmm.
Um, that actually had some effect on the debate, because there was a point there where I was basically kind of, it was suggested to me, I guess, to stop making the argument I was making and to you know, uh, basically defend a position that I wasn't there to defend.
Hmm.
So that was difficult. Um,
Hmm. What position was that? Was that what position were they kind of, was it the audience assuming you were there to defend a different position than you wanted to, or?
yeah. So what Will wanted to keep doing was um, to look at particular passages, and one of the I would say probably one of my worst mistakes was not pointing something out. But so he wanted to look at passages from the King James and compare it to other English translations. And the thing that I failed to point out explicitly was that by so what I actually had planned to say, but I never got around to saying it. I don't know why. I guess heat of the moment.
It
Uh,
happens.
yeah, the plan was to point out that anytime in this debate that Will tries to uh, compare the King James against any other English translation, and to prove the superiority of the King James by appealing to something like uh, you know, the Greek or the Hebrew, he's conceding the debate to my position, because my position is that not the King James is the sole infallible rule and norm for theology, but the original language sources. And actually, well, so I wouldn't say that the King James is not an infallible rule and norm for theology. It is. It's just in a different sense, and it's not the only one. And compared to the original language sources, um, it's definitely not the authority in that case. The original language sources are always the authority over translations or versions.
So
So
your
I did
point
fail
then,
to. put that out there explicitly, which was
Mm.
not, that was probably my biggest failing. But I did try to point that out throughout the debate, that, when he was appealing to something else, he was proving that the King James is not the sole infallible rule and norm for theology. But reading, audience comments, that seemed to fall on a lot of deaf ears. In any case.
So I know, because I haven't been in like online debate world myself. I'm not really a debater. I prefer a discussion, right? In real life as well, face to face. But I know that when you're on the spot in an argument or a debate or something, even something, unstructured, it can be kind of difficult to make every point you want to make, or, in hindsight's always 2020, right? So you can think of a comeback, a day later, a week later, an hour later, whatever the case may be. And you're like, man, if I would have said that, it would have changed everything. Or if I would have said that, I wouldn't have stumbled over, the next thing or whatever. So do you have any like specific instances of that in this debate?
Um, yeah, definitely some specific ones that come to mind. Well, one, and this wasn't a huge part of my argument, but toward the beginning of the debate, I made a distinction between infallibility and inerrancy. And I didn't really bear that out very well. And also, so I brought that up during my rebuttal period, and then I had spoken so fast that I had a couple of minutes left, that I decided to append some additional comments, which were just terrible because they did not tie together the point that I was trying to make. So I guess the point that I was trying to make, if I could state it briefly, it was that the church has always believed that it possesses an infallible rule and norm for theology, and that after the original autographs had long perished and prior to
Mhm.
the production or the completion of the King James Version. So there's this period where neither of those things exist, and yet the church still believes it possesses an infallible rule and norm for theology. Well, the question is, what is that? And the other point that went along with that is that inerrancy is a relatively recent theological term. Now, the concept is pretty much is there in history, but usually when today, if you hear someone talking about inerrancy, almost everyone will say, "Oh yeah, Scripture is inerrant," and they'll refer to, any translation, or any Bible basically. But if you really press a person, they'll always, or mostly, they'll fall back to, well, properly only the original autographs are inerrant, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
Properly only the original autographs are inerrant. And so at that point, it's kind of irrelevant as far as, for any practical purposes. So that's why I preferred just not to use it or talk about it. And I really wanted to focus on, what is this thing that the church has always believed that it possessed as the sole infallible rule and norm for theology. So I don't know if that makes it any more clear, but it definitely was not very clear in the debate.
Yeah.
So that was one
So
thing.
then you're saying that the King James, as well as, if we're focusing on English translations anyway, King James, ESV, NIV, these are all sources and norms for theology because they're God's word. Yet when the authority over them would be the reproductions of the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic and the other if there's any other languages, the Bible is actually in the original form, and
Yeah,
those
exactly.
subsequent copies anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you're talking about a translation, it always has to be qualified, you know, uh, as far, no, maybe not, maybe that's not the best word, as far, but it always has to convey the inspired meaning of the original language sources. So uh if I could illustrate, let's so imagine you um take like a sentence in any language, whatever language, and it's copied exactly in the exact same language. Um,
Okay.
is there any question? And you don't. And let's say it's copied blindly. Okay, so you don't even know what
Right.
the original says, but there's a copy made from the original, and it's word for word, same language.
Okay.
Does that convey the meaning of the original?
Even if I don't understand it, I would assume it does, right?
Yeah, by nature it does,
Yeah.
because it's word for word copy. It's exactly what that original says.
Okay.
Now, let's say you do. Now, let's say you have one language and then it's copied, but actually translated to another language. Well, how do you know if it conveys the meaning of what the original actually said? You have to have recourse to that original. It doesn't, by nature, um, being an exact copy, convey that meaning, and it could
Hmm.
convey it better or worse depending on the translation. And no translation conveys the fullness of meaning of an original language in every case.
Yeah.
And that's actually a point that I would have liked to make, because well, and maybe I don't know, maybe we'll get into that later, I don't know. But so yeah, the versions or the translations are always ruled and normed and governed by the original language sources from which they derive.
Mhm. We have to have something to check them against, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
And every time that Will wanted to check two English translations to see, which one is superior, he's appealing to something other, or he has to appeal to something other than the King James,
Hmm.
which that was the question of the debate. What's the rule and norm? Well, it can't be the King James if the King James is one of the things in question.
So to put the best construction on for his point of view, he believes that the King James, he's KJV only. There are degrees and variations of King James only belief. Where would he fall on that? What is so? Um, so when he says it's infallible, he's checking other versions by it. Does he appeal to the Greek and to the Hebrew at all, or
He
um,
does when it suits his own purposes, but
okay?
if someone else wanted to appeal to them to suit his purposes, he does not allow it. And so his position, as far as I could tell, is very extreme. And that's so when I originally suggested the debate proposition, I was only somewhat surprised that he agreed to it. I wasn't totally surprised, because the reason I suggested it is because I knew how extreme his position actually is. And
So you were
so
trying to be tricky up front. Very,
kind of, I
very,
mean,
very
I was
Christian of
just
you.
trying to get to the heart of the matter, and not let him slither away like he normally does in a lot of his debates. And so yeah, he there was a quote from his website that I shared. I don't have it in front of me, but it was basically something like, "My authority is not the Greek or the Hebrew," and he always makes this claim that no one can show us what the Greek or the Hebrew is. But on the other hand,
Hmm.
he resolves textual problems with the King James version by appealing to the Greek and the Hebrew.
Hmm.
And so that was part of my argument. And he wanted to make the point, well, I'm appealing to the Greek and the Hebrew that underlie the King James version. And so there was a point in the debate where, well, this is another accusation he likes to make against non-King James onlyists, is that, well, they can't show us, what that infallible rule and norm or standard really is. They can't show us the Hebrew and the Greek. And so I said, well, and so he said, can you show me, what is this infallible rule and norm and standard that you're appealing to? And I said, the Greek and the Hebrew that underlie the King James text, would you accept that? And he said, no. So the very thing that he appeals to resolve many of his own issues, when I appeal to it
Yeah.
to make my argument, he cannot allow it. And
S-
I mean, if he allowed it, then he'd be conceding,
Yeah. So explain to me like I'm five. We got the King James from the Greek and the Hebrew.
Not exactly, because actually the King James is a revision of a previous Bible, and it's called the Bishop's Bible, which was
Okay.
the Bible that was authorized for use in the Church of England. So it's the 1602 Bishop's Bible. And the King James translators, so the rough history of it was the King's printers supplied 40 copies of these bishops' Bibles to the King James translators. And what they would do is they would annotate in the Bible, and they would make textual decisions or changes or translations. They would consult Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, but we don't have, like, for example, the King James Bible is not based on something like the Nestle-Aland critical text, which is a collation of many, many manuscripts to produce a critical text. So the King James was not produced in any way like that. It was more of a revision and a consultation of Greek and Hebrew manuscripts to try to resolve issues. But so
So they looked at the Bishop's Bible in English at that time, a very different language than it is now, at least in written form. They looked at that and then they compared that with the Greek and the Hebrew and other various texts.
yeah, and they consulted other English versions as well that had come prior to the Bishop's Bible. So there were other ones like Tyndale's Bible, the Matthew Bible. There are a lot of English translations prior to
Hmm.
the King
I knew about
James.
a few of those, but not all.
Yeah, and Coverdale. So there were a lot, but basically their textual basis was the Bishop's Bible, and one of the rules that they had to abide by. So they had a lot of these rules that were basically laid down, and I don't know if all at the command of the king or if some at the suggestions of the king, whatever it was, they had these rules that they were supposed to abide by. And one of them was to basically retain as much of the Bishop's Bible as possible, wherever possible. So
Okay.
yeah, it was not exactly, based solely off of Greek and Hebrew text. It was more of a revision.
So maybe we can briefly steelman his side then. How does he, like, genuinely, not an attempt to ridicule or anything, how does he get to the King James is superior to every other English translation? Is it based on, because I know some who would say, oh, the Greek, the Textus Receptus is a superior translation or a superior Greek manuscript to the critical text, or the, what was it called, the Textus Vaticanus or Textus Sinaiticus or whatever it is. So I've heard that argument, and then I've heard the type from that God literally inspired the King James translators to and basically became a second, almost maybe they wouldn't claim completely the same, but almost a second inspiration of the Bible. And then they point to the popularity and the enduring, the enduring qualities of the King James and all that sort of thing as evidence, or tertiary evidence at least, for that. How does he get to that position? Do you know?
Well, that was one of the questions I asked in the debate, because from what I can tell, and I did maybe kind of mess up in this regard a little bit, not a whole lot, I don't think, but um, so I was kind of operating under this assumption in the debate that he believes the King James translators were inspired. And it's because he uses he is on his website, he talks about the King James being an inspired translation. And one of the things I tried to point out in the debate is that there are kind of different senses or degrees. I mean, that's probably not the best way to say it, but like, well, just to give an example, the original autographs are immediately inspired, such that there's not any kind of error. And I mean, think Jesus's words, every jot and tittle. So the inspiration applies even at the level of every jot and tittle, so that they're completely perfect.
So as Paul or Luke or whoever put pen to paper, that was perfect and inspired, infallible.
That's
in
right.
Its original form.
Yeah, that's the result of an immediate inspiration of the Holy Ghost. But then when you get copies of that and human errors creep in, like textual variants, well, it's still the inspired word of God, but not in that exact same immediately inspired sense, right? And then when you move on from there to translations, which are attempting to convey the meaning in a totally different language or idiom, well, then you're even further from the originals. So he uses the language of inspiration on his website, and the reason I kind of mess up on this a little bit is because what he describes of the King James translators is that is basically a kind of inspiration. So he believes that God basically, he'll say, led or guided them to select the right texts, so to make the right textual choices. So if you're thinking of like textual criticism and determining which reading is better in the manuscript tradition, so he believes that the King James translators were led to do that perfectly, and they were preserved from all error in translating, such that their translation is completely perfect. And so from my perspective, that's a description of an immediate inspiration, because the doctrine of inspiration of the original autographs is exactly parallel to that, insofar as the original authors were given the exact words that God wanted them to write down for all posterity. And he also preserved them from all error and lapses in judgment, or, they made no historical errors, nothing like that. So what he describes is an inspiration of the King James translators. But during the debate, he got to a point where he wanted to deny that he was ascribing inspiration to the King James translators, which that's really the only way that you can get to his extreme KJV only position, is by, basically understanding the King James translators to have been inspired in that immediate sense by the Holy Spirit.
So his position is not that they were given the same revelation that the original writers were, the apostles, prophets, but that they were specifically or specially guided in a way that other translations into other languages have not been.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that would be an accurate representation of his position. And the way that he tried to get out of it was he tried to say, well, they're not apostles and prophets. And I kind of let him get away with that. But what I should have said was, exactly, they're not apostles and prophets. So, how do you ascribe this? What we essentially what we ascribe to the original writers? How do you ascribe the same kind of miracle to the King James translators? And anyway, that was another one of the questions that he really tried to avoid and avoided. But another thing that I pointed out is that so the apostles and the prophets, God confirmed their office by great miracles in many, if not most cases. So if you think back to Moses in the Exodus, where God is calling him, and Moses is like, well, what if they don't believe me? And so God gives him these signs, and he said, and he basically, he does these great miracles through Moses to confirm that Moses is sent by God. Well, God does this with his his prophets throughout the Old Testament, and then also in the New Testament. And so, like, to give an example from the New Testament, think of the book of John, where it's after it's the account of Thomas after the resurrection, and he says something like, Jesus did many other miracles among his disciples besides these, but these are written so that you may believe. So Jesus himself was confirmed, that he was the son of who he said he was, by his miracles and by his dying and rising from the dead. So that's at least the basis on how they were confirmed that what their testimony was true, and that what they were writing was comes from God. And so I asked him if he could, show something similar to have taken place with the King James translators, and he just refused to do it. He does try to appeal to some like really non-miraculous evidences, like time, we tell time from England. So our England is like our base. So things like
and
some really things like that. And the first book, or the first verse in the Bible, Genesis 1, has the exact same number of words and syllables and vowels and consonants as the very last verse in the King James version. And he'll ask the question, do you think that's a coincidence? And my answer to that would be, maybe they did it on purpose. This isn't, they're not parting the Red Sea or anything. So how do we know that they were directly inspired by God, such that this translation of theirs is the perfect word of God, no error, and it can't be supplanted by anything. So I don't think he really.
In my college, my Bible college I went to, the senior men would have just like a theological examination, kind of like a mock ordination almost, where two staff members would question you over, tell me the verse where this is found in the Bible. Tell me this. Like, you're expected to know a lot of scripture, a lot of, different topics. And one thing I was thinking about at the time, I was still kind of on the fence of being a KJV only person, but I didn't tell them that. But one thing I noted was, these other churches, and I was firmly on the Baptist fundamental side at the time. So I was like, well, these other churches, they don't have a doctrine of preservation. And what's interesting is that at least the independent Baptists that I grew up in, there's, instead of just infallibility and inerrancy and kind of the more typical doctrines of the Bible that you'll see on most church websites, they have a third one added there, which is preservation. They believe that God has somehow miraculously preserved his words in the King James. And you don't want to be too dogmatic and bring in matters of evidence when all the time when it's a faith topic, right? But that's my question, is where's the evidence for that?
Mhm.
Is it?
Yeah, and most traditions believe in like some form of preservation, right? Since God says that His word won't pass away, and
Yeah.
indeed it hasn't. But yeah, I think the King James onlyist takes it too far and says, he's perfectly preserved it in the King James, and basically what they're calling preservation is more akin to an inspiration, an immediate inspiration,
Mm.
by which they were preserved from all error and they made the perfect choices. But um, that was one of my main arguments was from the doctrine, and I think that's actually my primary argument from the doctrine of
Mm.
inspiration. But that's the one that really they did not want to hear. And so yeah, at one point they basically uh they kind of tried to steer me away from talking about it, and wanted to try to prevent me from talking about it. And it was I don't know if you want me to go into detail about
Yeah,
that.
if you want, yeah. That was Will, and was it the moderator too, or like what was the scenario there?
Yeah, I don't want to blame Donnie at all. But I went back and I was reading the chat comments, and I mean, it's exactly what he said, that the people in the audience, they just didn't want to hear it. And so basically there was a point where Will, he wanted to talk about a passage in Daniel 9:26. And I don't have it in front of me. Maybe I should pull it up.
Oh, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, if you could pull it up, that'd be great. But while you pull that up, so he prefaced it and he said that basically he wanted to demonstrate that there's false doctrine taught in non-King James English Bibles. So that's the way he prefaced it. But so
Mhm.
explicitly, these Bibles teach false doctrine. And do you have it up there?
Yep. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined.
Yeah. So that verse, so 9:26, if all you had was the book of Daniel, what doctrine do you think not verse 9:26 there would be talking about? If that was all you had.
I don't know. I mean, from my context, I'm thinking of because I have context with the rest of the Bible.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
crucifixion, and there's and then there's like some sort of war. So it'd be like the Messiah is going to be killed, and then there's going to be maybe a physical battle with Satan on the earth, like immediately.
Uh-huh.
It seems, if I had no other context, right?
Yeah. So what they want to do with that verse is that Messiah will be cut off, um, but not for himself. And so they say that this is clearly a substitutionary atonement or vicarious satisfaction, however you want to refer to it. And
Okay.
well, if all you had is Daniel 9:26, I could not get, very hidden, I guess. It's kind of like what the what the papists do, where it's like, if you have any kind of inkling that this doctrine can be found in, this one word of this verse, then
Hmm.
you can prove it from that. But
Purgatory.
yeah, so it's kind of doing that same thing. But so yeah, they wanted to turn to that and look at it. And well, from my perspective, that's not so. In Lutheranism, when we do theology, we have what we call the seats of doctrine, and this is not one of them. Okay, this Daniel 9:26 is not the seat of doctrine for
Yeah.
the substitutionary atonement. If I'm going to talk about the substitutionary atonement, I'm going to go to something like Galatians 3:13 or
Yeah.
2 Corinthians 5:14 or Isaiah 53. I mean, substitutionary atonement there is so clearly taught. So,
Gotcha.
he really wants to focus on well, first of all, he said these non-King James Bibles, they reject doctrines. But if you look at like the English Standard Version, it says, and after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. Now, is that rejecting the substitutionary atonement? It's not rejecting it. It might not be. I mean, first of all, it's not clear at all in the King James text on its own. But the ESV in that regard is hardly any less clear than the King James.
Yeah.
So he kept talking about, I wanted to get in the weeds or make mountains out of molehills, and I think that's exactly what he was trying to do with some of these verses.
Yeah, I haven't heard this specific example, but I have heard other examples about, they'll say the corrupt versions or the modern versions dilute the deity of Christ or other things, and they'll go to specific verses where maybe the wording has been changed, and so it can, and taken in a vacuum, it looks like, oh, this is a
Yeah.
conspiracy by the Vatican to, who believe in Jesus as divine, right? In spite of maybe our other theological disagreements, there's no question that they believe Jesus is in fact God and the Son of God, and has died for our sins. So
And gives himself to us in his body and blood and all,
yes,
like it's,
and on and
but yeah,
on. I don't
yeah,
think there's a conspiracy there that they want people to become pagans, right? And yeah,
yeah. So yeah, in the debate, like that part wasn't that good for me, just because I wasn't really prepared for those kinds of discussions, because like I mentioned, go to his website, he's got hundreds of these verses on
mhm.
there, and there's no possible way I would have been able to read them all in a month's time. But I mean, I think anyone even listening to us right now will see that that's just making a mountain out of a molehill, you could say.
Yeah,
But yeah,
interesting.
they like to do that and kind of distract from what the real issue is, or the more important questions.
Hmm.
But it was funny though. Also at that point, this exact exchange happened where he said, "You don't have a copy of the original Hebrew," and then about two breaths later, he said, "But let's go back here. Just a couple of things on the Hebrew. There's no verb in the Hebrew text of Daniel 9." And I called him out on it, but then he kind of talked over me. But I said, "Well, wait, what Hebrew? Because you just said we don't have the Hebrew."
Was that
So
during the free flowing discussion?
yeah, it was during the.
Th- Those are kind of tough. I'd say the more structured you're going to be online anyway, the better. Just because it's, you can talk over people even unintentionally. Um, and yeah, it just doesn't work, I think, as well online as it does maybe in person.
Yeah,
You can cut a mic off, when you're in person, or depending on the structure, you can, basically shout the person down. It's a little tough to do that on over Zoom or Skype or whatever y'all were using.
yeah, and I tried throughout the debate to like let him talk and get his words in, but I mean, he'll just go on and not let you get a word in. So there
Mm.
are some times where I had to kind of interrupt him too, or try to uh, insert myself into the conversation to get a word.
Yeah. It's
So
like,
yeah,
take a breath, Will, take a breath.
yeah.
Is there any other spots where you were like you had like a Homer Simpson moment uh in hindsight?
Um. So, oh yeah, it's around the 47-minute mark where he asked me a question about something along the lines of, when you say all inspiration is given by God, what are you referring to? And the way I understood his question was, what was that passage referring to when it was spoken or written or whatever? And I just responded or blurted out, not the King James. And then he asked it again, and I said, not the King James. But so yeah, it was not my intent at all to, deny that the King James is the inspired word of God. I misunderstood his question there, and I answered pretty stupidly. But it was the point that I had made in my opening argument was that when those were written, the King James didn't exist. So I mean, that's a pretty basic point. So anyway, that's definitely something I would have wanted to clear up. Other than that,
That's kind of the lowlights then. Any
those are
highlights? Anything you think you like knocked it out of the park, or maybe strategies you would replicate on other debates?
So that one question where I asked him, about the Greek and Hebrew underlying the King James, and where he just flat out said no. I mean, I thought it was a good point. Obviously, I don't think other King James onlyists would think it is, but besides that, I think, excuse me, at the end, the discussion kind of turned toward, I guess you could call it, textual variants in the King James version itself. And I relied on the scholarship of this guy named David Norton, who served as the editor for what's called the New Cambridge Paragraph Bible. So it's a revision of the Cambridge Paragraph Bible, or something like that. Well, the King James onlyists, they didn't like that. They keep saying it's not an authoritative revision. It's not an authoritative revision. I kept seeing that in comments after the debate. But in any case, that's not the point. The point that I made in the debate was, and that David Norton himself makes in his book, which is called Textual History of the King James Bible, is that there are things in the 1611 original edition. So now actually in 1611, there were two editions that came out. So there are two 1611 King James editions. But anyway, plug your ears to that. So the original 1611 King James version had some readings in it that were later changed, and some of them even corrected because they don't actually agree with the Hebrew text, or the Greek or the Hebrew. In the two instances, well, I brought up one instance. I didn't have the time to bring up the other one, but so in this one, this particular variant, you could call it, it's Hosea 6:5, and in the original 1611 printing, there's a word there that reads showed, so shewed. And in later editions, it was changed to hewed, so hewed. So I think the verse reads, I have hewed them by the prophets, or in the 1611 it was, I have showed them by the prophets.
Right.
So yeah, in later editions it was changed to hewed, which agrees better with the Hebrew text. But what David Norton points out in his work is that so what KJV onlyists will say is, oh well, that was a printing error, and it was corrected in later editions. So they blame the printer, right? But what David Norton demonstrates, based on the evidence that we have for the original King James version, is that showed was actually a textual decision of the King James translators. And he demonstrates this because what we have, you remember I mentioned earlier, the King's printer provided 40 copies of the 1602 Bishop's Bible to the translators. Well, we have one of them. And it's not exactly like just one copy. It appears to be perhaps multiple copies bound into a single volume. So David Norton's conclusion then is that this represents a late stage of the work of the King James translators, and possibly even the what the printer himself worked from. And in the one surviving annotated 1602 Bishop's Bible that we have, because remember what they did was they annotated the Bible, they crossed things out, they wrote in the margin, they made changes. What we have in this the annotated Bible that survives is in the text there in Hosea 6:5. Now actually in the 1602 it reads cut down instead of hewed. So hewed basically means cut down.
Yeah.
So it reads cut down, and so cut down is crossed out and showed is written in. So showed was actually based on this evidence, which is the best evidence that we have for the the final copy or the late stage work of the King James translators. What that demonstrates is that showed was the decision of the King James translators, and that's what ended up in the 1611 Bible. But later editors changed it. So my question to Will was, when you have issues like this, what do you appeal to resolve it? Do you appeal to the Hebrew? If you appeal to the Hebrew, you're conceding the debate, right? Because you're no longer appealing to the King James. Or do you appeal to the King James translators because they were the ones who were inspired? If you appeal to them, then you have to demonstrate that they were in fact inspired in this way. And so, it's this Gordian knot that he's got himself into that he just can't untie. Yeah. And in the debate, he just kept insisting is a printing error. And that was the thing that after the debate, he went online to try to give an explanation for, but which was not very good. So I think that was probably my, no, I don't think it was my strongest point. I think the strongest point was, my argument from inspiration, but I think it was the point that probably was most effective because, it wasn't, there were no people in the audience at that point that were like, stop arguing this point. So they didn't try to get me to give up this argument. So I want to think that it was effective. And so actually for the rest of the debate, I think I focused, I shifted my focus more toward that kind of line of argumentation from the textual variants that exist within the King James tradition itself. So that's kind of where I went in a lot of my audience questions, even though it was not, from my perspective, the strongest argument. But I think it's still absolutely devastating to his position. But
yeah, that is really fascinating. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah. So, and I was surprised actually, because when I was preparing, I had looked on his website and he had nothing about either of those two variants on his website. So Hosea 6:5 and the other one is 2 Chronicles 32:5, I think, off the top of my head. But yeah, essentially the same thing in both of those verses, but he had nothing on it, and I'm pretty sure he had never even heard it.
I guarantee you there's going to be an article now.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, his response that or explanation he came up with so far is not very good.
Well, it doesn't seem to have stopped him yet. So, not to bag on Will unfairly.
Yeah, no,
Cool.
I think he's um, a nice guy for the most part. Except when, he starts calling you a Bible babble, whatever.
Did he drop that on you live?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, because I've seen him use Bible buffet, Bible agnostic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He called me all.
Wow, that's fun. A little
And,
bit of
man, the audience, some of them were just nasty. When I went back and read the comments, I mean, there were people in there questioning basically saying I'm not saved, and saying, Mark, is your God unable to do such and such, or
like
so,
he can't preserve his word. Yeah.
Is your
becomes,
God able to
becomes a loop, a weird feedback loop. Fascinating. That was fun. Any final thoughts then on the debate, on the lead up or the aftermath?
No. I mean, like I said, I still really enjoyed it. Especially more toward the end. It was toward the end that I think I started, getting my wind and getting more enthusiastic, I guess. But overall, I enjoyed it for my first, debate. It's definitely challenging. I don't consider myself like a quick thinker or quick-witted by any means. I tend to think, more slowly and kind of take my time. And so in that, debates are definitely or live debates are definitely far more challenging than they appear. Sitting and on the sidelines for so many debates and being able to, recognize where people are, making errors and stuff like that. Much easier when you're sitting on the sidelines. So for all the people who do live debates, lots of credit to them.
Armchair quarterbacks are a thing, right?
Say that again.
Armchair quarterbacks, they are a thing.
Yeah. Yep. So would I do it again? I think so. Different topic or topics. Not my favorite one, although I mean, I'll definitely watch some more King. And in fact, Will Kinney, he's gonna debate. He's got another debate coming up next month on the same channel on King James only. So I'll tune into that, and I'll continue to keep up with the discussion. But
you're gonna harass him in the comments.
Yeah, definitely. I'll go in there and I'll ask my audience questions, and same ones that I asked him that he didn't answer in our own debate.
That's funny.
Needle him a little bit, but he's definitely a brother, and at least that's as far as I can tell. And so I'm very thick-skinned, so maybe that's the one thing I got going for me in live debates, is that I don't think people get under my skin very easily. So
spend enough time in YouTube comments, that might change.
Yeah.
Oh man, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be on, and I can't wait to see more that you come out with in the future. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Ben. Well, and thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe, and maybe leave a comment saying what your preferred version is. You're very allowed to say the King James. Till next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace.
Amen.
See y'all later.